Welcome to U.S. Government. Today I'm going to try to do something that every single U.S. history teacher, as well as Schoolhouse Rock and countless educational videos have tried to do before me. Explain the legislative process, i.e. how a bill becomes a law. There's really no good way to do this, so let's just get started. So I made this diagram that may or may not be useful in explaining how a bill becomes a law. If you're in one of my classes, you have one of these. If not, I can get one to you if you really want. So let's start at the beginning, which is a congressman or senator introducing a bill. The real beginning is having an idea, which may come from a legislator or an interest group, or even the executive branch, but the legislative process formally begins with a legislator introducing a bill. After the bill is introduced, it is referred to a committee. Let's imagine that the bill starts in the Senate, because it's a little easier to visualize. So say it's a bill about making rules for the Navy. That bill would be sent to the Senate Armed Services Committee, where members would debate it and write it up in a formal legal language in a process called markup. The committee votes on the bill, and if it passes by a majority, it moves on to the full Senate for consideration. The Senate then debates the bill according to the rules it determines. These include the time allotted for debate and whether or not there can be amendments. If amendments are allowed, it's called an open rule, and if there are no amendments, it's a closed rule. Open rules make it much less likely for a bill to pass because congressmen can add amendments to a bill to make it much less likely that other senators will vote on it. For example, in our Navy rule, a senator who didn't want it to pass could add an amendment that outlaws abortion completely, making it unlikely that Democrats would vote for it. After debate, the Senate votes, and if the bill passes with a majority, then it is sent to a committee in the House that has appropriate jurisdiction. The House has an extra step in that the bill must go to the Rules Committee, which sets parameters for debate. If the Rules Committee reports the bill to the House, it can be voted on, and again, if it receives a majority, it passes. So if the exact same bill that passes one House passes the other, then it goes to the President for signature or veto, but this almost never happens. Usually the second House to get the bill wants to make changes to it, and if this happens, the bill has to go to a conference committee, which has members from both houses of Congress. The conference committee tries to reconcile the two different versions into a new bill, which is sometimes called a compromise bill. The reason why the second house can't hold a vote on the bill that it has amended is because that's no longer the bill that the first house passed, and the Constitution requires both houses to pass a bill before it goes to the President. So after the conference committee, the bill goes back to the full House and Senate, where, if it passes again by a majority, it will then be sent to the President. The President has 2 or 3 options, depending, believe it or not, on the time of the year. His first option is to sign it, in which case it becomes a law, and then we're done. His second option is to veto it, in which case it doesn't become a law. The President's third option is only available at the end of a congressional term. If the President neither signs nor vetoes a bill, and in the next 10 days Congress goes out of session, the bill does not become a law. This is called a pocket veto, and is used only when the President doesn't want a law to pass, but politically doesn't want to veto it either. Congress can avoid this altogether by passing bills and giving them to the President before that 10-day period. If the President neither signs nor vetoes a law, and Congress remains in session for more than 10 days, the bill becomes a law without the President's signature. Now there is a check on the President's power to veto a bill, and that's the veto override. If the President vetoes a law, Congress can override the veto and make it a law if both houses approve it by a 2/3 majority. This is pretty rare, and the best example is the Taft-Hartley Act of 1953, which passed over Truman's veto. If the President knows that a bill has passed by 2/3 of both houses, he won't veto it, and if Congress knows it doesn't have 2/3, it won't try to override the veto. So that's how a bill becomes a law, but just as important and much more common is for a bill not to become a law. Let's look at the places a bill can die. The first place a bill can die is in the hands of the Speaker or Majority Leader, who don't even have to refer the bill to a committee. But assuming that the bill does get referred, the committee can kill it by not voting on it at all, or if they do vote and it doesn't get a majority, the committee won't report it to the appropriate House. In the Senate, the leadership can refuse to schedule a vote on the bill, effectively killing it, or they can filibuster it, which is so complicated that I'm going to do another episode on it and other irregular congressional procedures. But you should know that a filibuster blocks the vote in the Senate. Finally, The bill can fail to get a majority in either house, in which case it fails. The House doesn't have a filibuster, but the Rules Committee can kill a bill by not creating rules for its debate. The full House can then vote to recommit the bill to committee, which is a signal to drop it or to change it significantly. As in the Senate, the entire House can kill a bill by not giving it a majority vote. Once a compromise bill has been hammered out by the conference committee, either house can still kill the bill by not giving it a majority. If it does get a majority in both houses, the president can still kill it with a veto or a pocket veto. And if both houses can't muster 2/3 to override this veto, it fails to become law. So, as you can see, there are more ways for a bill to fail than to pass. These hurdles are sometimes called veto gates, and they make it difficult for Congress to act, except on issues where there is wide agreement or that are very trivial, like naming post offices, which is the one thing that Congress seems to be very good at. One important thing to note is that many of the veto gates are purely procedural. The easiest ways for Congress to kill bills is simply not to vote on them, or to even schedule votes for them. This way, they don't have to go on record as being for or against a bill, just whether or not they support having a vote, and people rarely check up on this sort of thing. This brings us back to the first episode where I explained that the government is systematically set up to make it difficult to get things done. In Congress, some of the hurdles are structural, and some of them are procedural. Now, you can argue that Congress has become dysfunctionally unable to accomplish anything, but looking at the process of lawmaking, it's hard not to imagine that this isn't by design.